The rain came down in sheets that November morning in 2002, turning the streets of San Jose's Willow Glen neighborhood into rivers of reflected neon and headlight glare. Amelia King stood at the window of her small apartment above the bookstore on Lincoln Avenue, watching the water cascade down the glass in patterns that reminded her of tears. She pressed her palm against the cold pane, feeling the chill seep into her bones, and wondered, not for the first time, if anyone would notice if she simply disappeared. At 28 years old, Amelia had become a ghost in her own life. She moved through the world with the careful precision of someone who had learned that invisibility was a form of protection. Her dark hair, always pulled back in a severe bun, framed a face that might have been beautiful if it ever smiled. But Amelia hadn't smiled in so long that the muscles seemed to have forgotten how. The bookstore below, King's Corner Books, had been in her family for 3 generations. Her grandfather had opened it in 1952, back when Willow Glen was still farmland and orchards. Her father had expanded it in the 70s, adding the rare book section that became their claim to fame. And now it was hers, inherited 6 months ago after her father's sudden heart attack, along with all the memories and secrets the old building held in its walls. She glanced at the clock. 5:45 in the morning. In 15 minutes, she would descend the narrow staircase at the back of the store, unlock the heavy oak door, and begin the ritual that had defined her existence for the past decade. But this morning felt different. The air held a charge, like the moment before lightning strikes, and Amelia's hands trembled as she reached for her coffee mug. The mug was chipped, a souvenir from a college trip to Seattle she'd taken with her roommate, Rebecca. That was before everything changed. Before the night in March of 1999 that split her life into before and after. Before she became the girl everyone whispered about but no one truly saw. Downstairs, the bookstore waited in darkness. Amelia descended the stairs slowly, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She loved this time of morning, when the store belonged only to her, when she could pretend that the outside world didn't exist. The smell of old paper and leather bindings wrapped around her like a familiar embrace. Thousands of books lined the shelves, each one a door to somewhere else, somewhere better. She moved through the aisles with practiced ease, straightening spines, adjusting displays, running her fingers along the worn covers. In the rare books section at the back, behind a locked glass case, sat the store's most valuable possession, a first edition of John Steinbeck's East of Eden, signed by the author himself. Her grandfather had acquired it in 1952, the year the book was published, the year he'd opened the store. It was worth over $50,000 now, but her father had refused to sell it, insisting it was the heart of the store, the reason they'd survived when so many other independent bookstores had closed. Amelia paused in front of the case, studying her reflection in the glass. She barely recognized herself anymore. The woman staring back looked hollow, haunted, like a photograph left too long in the sun. Where had the girl gone, the one who used to laugh, who used to dream of writing novels, who used to believe in happy endings? The bell above the door chimed, startling her. She whirled around, her heart hammering against her ribs. No one should be here yet. The store didn't open until 7. Amelia? You in here? She recognized the voice immediately. Marcus Chen, her oldest friend, the only person from her past who still made an effort to check on her. He appeared at the end of the aisle, his police uniform damp from the rain, his face etched with exhaustion. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" He moved closer, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched and unclenched. Marcus had been a beat cop for 5 years, working his way up through the San Jose Police Department with the same determination he'd brought to everything since they were kids playing in the orchards that used to surround their neighborhood. "I needed to talk to you," he said, "before you heard it from someone else." Amelia felt the floor shift beneath her feet. Heard what? Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Marcus glanced around, as if checking to make sure they were alone. "There's been a development. In your case. The one from '99. The words hit her like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of a bookshelf to steady herself. What kind of development? They found new evidence. DNA evidence. The technology's gotten better, and they were able to retest some samples that were inconclusive before. He paused, searching her face. Amelia, they're going to make an arrest. The room spun. 3 years. For 3 years, she had lived under a cloud of suspicion. Her name dragged through the newspapers, her reputation destroyed, her future obliterated. The case had gone cold, the investigation stalled, but the damage had been done. Everyone in San Jose knew her name, knew the story, believed the lies. Who? The word came out as barely more than a breath. Marcus's expression shifted, something like relief mixing with the exhaustion. Not you. They know it wasn't you, Amelia. The DNA proves it. But... He hesitated, and she saw fear flicker across his face. It's someone you know. Someone we all know. Before she could ask who, the bell above the door chimed again. This time, multiple footsteps echoed through the store. Amelia's assistant manager, Sarah Kowalski, appeared first, her red hair wild from the rain, her eyes wide with shock. Behind her came 2 more figures. Detective Janet Morrison, the lead investigator on the case, and a younger detective Amelia didn't recognize. Miss King, Detective Morrison said, her voice gentle but official. I'm sorry to intrude so early. We need to ask you some questions about the events of March 15, 1999. Amelia's legs threatened to give out. Sarah rushed to her side, supporting her with surprising strength for someone so small. It's okay, Sarah whispered. I'm here. We're all here. Detective Morrison pulled out a worn notebook, the same one she'd used during all those interrogations 3 years ago. I want you to know first that you're not a suspect. You never should have been. We made mistakes in this investigation, and I take full responsibility for that. But now we have a chance to make it right. Tell me what happened, Amelia managed to say, her voice stronger than she felt. Tell me everything. The detective's eyes softened. March 15, 1999. You were 25 years old, working as a teacher at Lincoln High School. You stayed late that night to grade papers. On your way home, you stopped at the 7-Eleven on Minnesota Avenue. Do you remember? How could she forget? That night was burned into her memory with photographic clarity. She'd been exhausted, looking forward to a quiet evening at home. Maybe a glass of wine and a good book. The convenience store had been nearly empty. Just her and the clerk and one other customer she hadn't paid attention to. I remember, she said. You purchased a bottle of wine and a sandwich. You paid in cash. The clerk, David Martinez, remembered you because you came in often. He said you were always polite, always smiled at him. Amelia nodded. David had been a sweet kid, maybe 19 or 20, putting himself through community college. They chatted sometimes about books. He'd wanted to be an engineer. When you left the store, you walked to your car, which was parked in the lot behind the building. You told us you heard something. A sound that made you stop. A scream, Amelia whispered. I heard someone scream. The memory crashed over her like a wave. She'd been fumbling with her keys, her arms full of groceries, when the sound cut through the night. A woman's scream, sharp and terrified, coming from the alley beside the store. Amelia had dropped everything and run toward the sound, her teacher's instinct to help overriding any sense of self-preservation. You found a woman in the alley, Detective Morrison continued. Jennifer Hartwell, age 23, a graduate student at San Jose State. She'd been attacked, beaten. You called 911, stayed with her until the ambulance arrived. You probably saved her life. But Jennifer died 3 days later in the hospital, Amelia said, the words tasting like ash. And when she regained consciousness before she died, she said she saw my face. This was the nightmare that had consumed her life. Jennifer Hartwell, in her final hours of lucidity before succumbing to her injuries, had told the police that her attacker had been a woman with dark hair pulled back in a bun, wearing a green jacket. Amelia had been wearing a green jacket that night. Amelia always wore her hair in a bun. And somehow, in Jennifer's traumatized, dying mind, The woman who'd tried to save her had become confused with the woman who'd hurt her. The media had descended like vultures. Teacher questioned in brutal attack. Hero or monster? Dark secrets of San Jose educator. The school had placed her on administrative leave while the investigation continued. Students she'd taught for years looked at her with fear and suspicion. Parents demanded she be fired. Her father had stood by her, hiring lawyers they couldn't afford, insisting on her innocence even as the evidence seemed to pile up against her. But there had been no physical evidence linking her to the crime. No blood on her clothes. No DNA under Jennifer's fingernails that matched her own. No motive, no history of violence. Just the word of a dying woman whose memory had been compromised by trauma and head injury. Eventually, without enough evidence to charge her, the investigation had stalled. But the damage was done. She'd lost her job, her reputation, her sense of safety in the world. The DNA evidence we recovered from beneath Jennifer's fingernails was degraded, Detective Morrison explained. In 1999, our technology couldn't get a clear profile. But DNA analysis has advanced significantly in the past few years. We sent the samples to a new lab, and they were able to extract a usable profile. Amelia's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. And the DNA belongs to someone who worked at the 7-Eleven. Someone who was there that night. Someone who had access to Jennifer when she came into the store just before the attack. The room tilted. Amelia grabbed Sarah's arm for support. Who? Detective Morrison exchanged a glance with her partner. David Martinez, the clerk. The one you talked to that night. The one you thought was a nice kid. The world stopped. David. Sweet, shy David who'd wanted to be an engineer. David who'd always had a kind word. Who'd recommended books to her. Who'd seemed so harmless. David, who'd probably been watching Jennifer that night. Who'd followed her out when his shift ended. Who'd attacked her in the alley while Amelia was walking to her car. But he told you he saw me leave, Amelia said, her mind racing. He said I left before Jennifer came in. He gave me an alibi. He lied, Marcus said quietly. He lied because he thought you might have seen something. He thought if he vouched for you, made himself seem helpful, no one would look at him too closely. And it worked. We focused on you because of Jennifer's identification, and we didn't dig deep enough into David's background. What background? Amelia asked. Detective Morrison flipped through her notebook. After we identified his DNA, we started investigating. Turns out David Martinez wasn't his real name. He was born David Chun, no relation to Marcus here. He'd been arrested twice in Los Angeles for assault, but the charges were dropped both times due to lack of evidence. He changed his name and moved to San Jose in 1998, got a job at the 7-Eleven, kept his head down. We think Jennifer Hartwell might not have been his first victim, but she's the first one we can prove. Amelia felt Sarah's arms wrap around her as her knees finally gave out. They sank to the floor together, Amelia's body shaking with sobs she'd held back for 3 years. All the pain, all the isolation, all the nights she'd wondered if she was losing her mind, if maybe she had done something and couldn't remember. It all came pouring out in great, gasping waves. Where is he now? She finally managed to ask. We have officers en route to his apartment as we speak, Detective Morrison said. He still lives in San Jose, still works at a convenience store, different location. We wanted to talk to you first, to let you know what was happening before the news breaks. This is going to be big, Amelia. The media's going to be all over it. Your name will be in every paper again. But this time, they'll know the truth, Sarah said fiercely, holding Amelia tighter. This time, they'll know you were innocent all along. Marcus knelt beside them, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I never doubted you, he said. Not for a second. But I couldn't do anything. I was just a rookie, and they wouldn't listen to me. Amelia reached out and squeezed his hand. You believed me. That's what mattered. As the morning light strengthened outside, turning the rain-washed streets silver, Amelia sat on the floor of her grandfather's bookstore, surrounded by the people who'd stood by her, and felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. But beneath the hope was something else. Anger. Anger at David Martinez, at the system that had failed her, at the 3 years of her life that had been stolen. "I want to be there," she said, looking up at Detective Morrison. "When you arrest him, I want to see his face when he realizes he's caught." The detective shook her head. "That's not a good idea, Amelia. Let us handle this." "No." Amelia stood, finding strength in her legs she didn't know she had. "For 3 years, I've been invisible. I've hidden in this store, afraid to face the world. But I didn't do anything wrong. I tried to help someone and I got punished for it. I deserve to see justice done." Detective Morrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but you stay in the car with me. You don't approach him. Understood?" "Understood." Sarah grabbed Amelia's hand. "I'm coming too." "Me three," Marcus said. As they prepared to leave, Amelia took one last look around the bookstore. The Steinbeck First Edition gleamed behind its glass case, a reminder of her family's legacy, of persistence and survival. Her grandfather had built this place from nothing, had weathered the Depression and 2 world wars. Her father had kept it alive through economic downturns and the rise of chain bookstores, and she would keep it alive too, would reclaim her life, would step out of the shadows. But first, she needed to see the face of the man who tried to destroy her. The drive to David Martinez's apartment complex took 20 minutes through rain-slicked streets that glistened like oil paintings in the gray morning light. Amelia sat in the back of Detective Morrison's unmarked sedan, watching San Jose slide past the window like a film reel of her lost life. They passed Lincoln High School, where she'd taught American literature to sophomores and juniors, where she'd stayed late countless evenings helping students with their essays, where she'd believed she was making a difference. The building looked the same as it had 3 years ago. Red brick, wide lawn, the oak tree where students gathered during lunch. But Amelia was different. She'd been 25 when she'd last walked through those doors, young and idealistic, still believing that hard work and good intentions were enough. She'd loved teaching with a passion that surprised even herself. Literature had always been her refuge, and sharing that love with teenagers who thought they hated reading had felt like a calling. She remembered specific students: Tyler, who'd struggled with dyslexia but found his voice writing poetry; Maria, who'd escaped her chaotic home life by losing herself in the worlds of Toni Morrison and Alice Walker; Jason, who'd been so angry until she'd introduced him to James Baldwin and suddenly he'd found someone who understood his rage. She'd poured herself into that job, arriving early, staying late, bringing in books from her family's store, creating a classroom that felt safe and welcoming. And then it had all been ripped away in one night. "I used to walk this route every day," Amelia said quietly, more to herself than to her companions. "I'd stop at that coffee shop on the corner. What's it called now? It used to be Pete's Cafe." "It's a Starbucks now," Marcus said from the front passenger seat. "Of course it is." She smiled sadly. "Pete made the best blueberry muffins. He'd save one for me every morning because he knew I'd come in at 7:15, right before first period." Sarah, squeezed in beside Amelia, reached over and took her hand. "You can have that again. You can have all of it back." But could she? Amelia wasn't sure. The woman who'd taught at Lincoln High felt like a stranger now, someone she'd read about in a book. That Amelia had been open, trusting, eager to connect with the world. This Amelia had learned to keep her distance, to build walls, to expect disappointment and betrayal. The change hadn't happened overnight. In those first weeks after the attack, after Jennifer Hartwell's death, Amelia had still believed the truth would prevail. She'd cooperated fully with the investigation, answering every question, submitting to every test, certain that her innocence would be obvious to everyone. Her father had sat beside her through every interrogation, his hand steady on her shoulder, his faith in her unwavering. "Tell them again what happened," he'd say. "Tell them as many times as they need to hear it." So she had. Over and over, she'd described that night, the stop at the 7-Eleven, the conversation with David about a book he was reading for his engineering class, the walk to her car, the scream that had split the night open. She'd described finding Jennifer in the alley, the girl's face swollen and bloody, her breathing shallow and labored. She described holding Jennifer's hand while they waited for the ambulance, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure Jennifer could hear, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in. Detective Morrison had been kind at first, treating her like a witness rather than a suspect. But as the investigation dragged on, as Jennifer's dying words were repeated and analyzed, as the media frenzy grew, the detective's questions had become sharper, more accusatory. Why did you really stop at the 7-Eleven that night, Amelia? Were you following Jennifer Hartwell? Had you seen her before? Maybe at the university? Had she done something to upset you? Think carefully. Are you sure you went to help her? Or did you go to finish what you started? The interrogations had blurred together into one endless nightmare of fluorescent lights and cold metal chairs and questions designed to make her doubt her own memory. And slowly, insidiously, Amelia had begun to wonder. What if there was something wrong with her? What if she'd somehow blocked out the truth? What if she was capable of violence and didn't know it? Her father had put a stop to those thoughts immediately. "You are my daughter," he'd said, his voice fierce. "I know you. I've known you since the day you were born. You couldn't hurt anyone. Don't let them make you doubt yourself." But the school board hadn't shared his certainty. 2 weeks after the attack, Amelia had been called into the principal's office and placed on administrative leave. "Just until this gets sorted out," Principal Henderson had said, not meeting her eyes. "We have to think about the students, about their safety." "I'm not a danger to anyone," Amelia had protested. "I'm sure that's true, but we have to be careful. Parents are concerned. Some have threatened to pull their children out if you continue teaching. You understand." She'd understood. She'd understood that reputation mattered more than truth, that perception trumped reality, that she'd been judged and convicted in the court of public opinion even though no charges had been filed. The months that followed had been a slow descent into isolation. Friends had stopped calling, uncomfortable with the cloud of suspicion that hung over her. Neighbors had crossed the street to avoid her. The mailbox had filled with hate mail, vicious letters calling her a monster, a murderer, threatening violence against her and her father. Someone had spray-painted "Killer" on the front of the bookstore. The windows had been smashed twice. Through it all, her father had stood firm. He'd cleaned up the graffiti, replaced the windows, installed security cameras. He'd kept the bookstore running, even as customers drifted away, even as bills piled up, even as the stress took its toll on his heart. "We don't give up," he'd told her. "We're kings. This is our store, our neighborhood, our home. We don't let them chase us away." But the stress had been killing him. Amelia could see it in the gray tinge of his skin, in the way he'd clutch his chest after climbing stairs, in the pills he'd started taking when he thought she wasn't looking. She'd begged him to rest, to take it easy, but he'd refused. "When your mother died," he'd said once, late at night in the bookstore's back office, "I promised her I'd take care of you. I'd protect you. I won't break that promise." Her mother. Amelia's memories of her were hazy, colored by time and loss. Elizabeth King had died when Amelia was 8, taken by breast cancer that had metastasized before the doctors caught it. Amelia remembered her mother's laugh, warm and bright like sunshine. She remembered bedtime stories, her mother's voice weaving magic from words on a page. She remembered the smell of vanilla and cinnamon that had always clung to her mother's sweaters. What would her mother think of her now? Would she be proud of how Amelia had survived? Or disappointed that she'd let the world make her small and scared? The car slowed, pulling Amelia from her thoughts. They'd arrived at a nondescript apartment complex in East San Jose, a cluster of 2-story buildings painted beige and brown, the kind of place people lived when they were trying to stay invisible. Detective Morrison parked across the street, where they had a clear view of the entrance to Building C. "He's in apartment 214, the detective said, speaking into her radio. "Team Alpha, move into position. Team Bravo, cover the back exit. Nobody moves until I give the signal." Amelia watched as police officers emerged from unmarked vehicles, moving with choreographed precision toward the building. Some wore uniforms, others plain clothes. All wore bulletproof vests. The sight should have made her feel safe, but instead, her stomach churned with anxiety. What if he runs? she asked. "He won't get far," Marcus assured her. "We have every exit covered." But Amelia wasn't thinking about David's escape. She was thinking about his face, trying to remember details from 3 years ago. He'd been young, probably her age or younger, with dark hair and a slight build. He'd worn glasses, she thought, and had a nervous habit of pushing them up his nose when he talked. He'd always been polite, deferential even, recommending books with genuine enthusiasm. How had she missed it? How had she looked at him night after night and not seen the violence lurking beneath the surface? What kind of teacher was she, claiming to understand people through literature, if she couldn't recognize evil when it smiled at her across a convenience store counter? "Don't do that," Sarah said softly, reading her expression. "Do what?" "Blame yourself. There's no way you could have known. Monsters don't come with warning labels." But that was exactly the problem, wasn't it? In books, the villains were obvious. They had menacing laughs and cruel eyes and dialogue that announced their intentions. In real life, evil wore glasses and talked about engineering classes and bagged your groceries with a friendly smile. Detective Morrison's radio crackled. "Team Alpha in position. Team Bravo ready." The detective took a deep breath, then spoke. "All teams, execute." Amelia leaned forward, her breath fogging the window. She watched as officers moved toward the apartment building, swift and silent. The world seemed to slow down, each second stretching into eternity. This was it. After 3 years of waiting, of wondering, of living in limbo, she was about to see the face of the man who destroyed her life. The officers disappeared into the building. Amelia counted heartbeats, 10, 20, 30. The rain had lightened to a drizzle, turning the morning gray and soft. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. A car drove past, the driver oblivious to the drama unfolding. Then movement. The apartment building's door burst open and officers emerged, surrounding a figure in handcuffs. Amelia's breath caught. Even from this distance, she recognized him. David Martinez, older now, heavier, his hair longer but still dark. He wore sweatpants and a t-shirt, and his face was a mask of confusion and fear. "That's him," she whispered. Detective Morrison nodded. "That's him." They walked David toward a patrol car, his head down, his shoulders hunched. He looked small, ordinary, nothing like the monster Amelia had built up in her mind. This was the man who'd beaten Jennifer Hartwell so badly that she died 3 days later in a hospital bed. This was the man who'd lied to police, who'd let Amelia take the fall for his crime, who'd gone on with his life while hers fell apart. And Amelia felt nothing, or maybe not nothing, maybe too much. Anger and relief and exhaustion and vindication all crashed together inside her chest until she couldn't tell them apart. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, had pictured herself screaming at him, demanding answers, making him see what he'd done to her. But now that it was happening, she found she had no words at all. David was almost to the patrol car when he looked up. His eyes swept across the street, and for one brief second, they locked with Amelia's. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by something that might have been guilt or might have been anger. Then the officers pushed his head down and guided him into the car. "It's over," Marcus said quietly. "It's really over." But was it? Amelia watched the patrol car drive away, carrying David Martinez toward justice, toward a trial, toward prison. The legal system would grind forward now, dissecting every piece of evidence, building a case, seeking conviction. Her name would be in the papers again, this time not as a suspect but as a victim, as the woman who'd been wrongly accused. The vindication should feel good. It should feel like victory. Instead, it felt like the end of one chapter and the terrifying beginning of another. For 3 years, she'd lived in a kind of stasis, suspended between guilt and innocence, between her old life and whatever came next. Now she'd have to figure out how to move forward, how to rebuild, how to become someone new. "Take me home," she said to Detective Morrison. "Please, I need to think." The ride back to the bookstore passed in silence. Amelia stared out the window, watching her city roll past. The city that had judged her, condemned her, and now would have to acknowledge its mistake. She wondered how many people would apologize, How many would simply pretend they'd never doubted her? How many would find new reasons to avoid her? When they pulled up in front of King's Corner Books, Amelia saw that a crowd had already gathered. News vans lined the street, reporters standing under umbrellas, cameras ready. Somehow they'd already heard about the arrest. Someone had leaked the story, and now the circus was beginning again. "Go through the back," Detective Morrison suggested. "I'll handle them." But Amelia shook her head. "No, I'm done hiding." She opened the car door and stepped out into the drizzle. Immediately, reporters surged forward, shouting questions, thrusting microphones at her face. "Miss King, how do you feel about the arrest? Did you know David Martinez? Will you be suing the police department? What do you want to say to the people who doubted you?" Amelia stood there, rain mixing with tears on her face, and looked at them. These strangers who'd picked apart her life for entertainment, who'd written headlines that had destroyed her reputation, who'd never once considered that she might be innocent. She wanted to scream at them, to unleash 3 years of pent-up rage and pain. But instead, she found herself speaking quietly, forcing them to lean in to hear. "I tried to save someone's life," she said, "and I was punished for it. For 3 years, I've lived under suspicion, lost my job, lost my reputation, lost parts of myself I'll never get back. But I survived. And now the truth is out, and I really hope, that everyone involved in this case takes a hard look at how quickly we condemn people, how eager we are to believe the worst, how little evidence we need to destroy someone's life." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Jennifer Hartwell deserved justice. She deserved better than what happened to her. And I hope that David Martinez spends the rest of his life paying for what he did. But I also hope that we, as a community, learn something from this. Because I'm not the only person who's been wrongly accused. I'm not the only life that's been destroyed by rush to judgment. We can do better. We have to do better. With that, she turned and walked into the bookstore, leaving the reporters shouting questions behind her. Sarah and Marcus followed, closing the door firmly against the chaos outside. Inside, the bookstore was dim and quiet, a sanctuary from the storm. Amelia leaned against the counter, her legs shaking, adrenaline finally crashing through her system. She'd done it. She'd faced them. She'd told her truth. "That was brave," Sarah said admiringly. "That was necessary," Amelia corrected. "I'm tired of being afraid." Marcus moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the crowd outside. "They're not going anywhere anytime soon. You might be stuck here for a while." Amelia looked around the bookstore, at the shelves she knew by heart, at the reading nook where customers could sit with a cup of coffee and lose themselves in a good story, at the rare bookcase holding her grandfather's Steinbeck first edition. This place had been her prison for 3 years, the only space where she felt safe. But maybe it could be something else now. Maybe it could be her starting point. "That's okay," she said. "I have work to do." She moved to the rare book section, unlocking the glass case and carefully removing the Steinbeck. The book felt heavy in her hands, substantial, real. She opened it to the title page, where John Steinbeck's signature slashed across the paper in bold black ink. Her grandfather had told her once that Steinbeck had come into the store the week it opened, had bought a copy of Cannery Row, and signed this first edition as a gift. "He told me something I never forgot," her grandfather had said. "He said that books are the only place where we can truly know another person's heart, where we can see the world through different eyes, where we can practice empathy without risk." Amelia traced the signature with her finger. For 3 years, she'd read obsessively, consuming books the way other people consumed food or air. She'd read because it was the only way to escape herself, to forget for a few hours that her life had fallen apart. But now she realized that reading had also kept her alive, had reminded her that stories could change, that characters could grow, that even the darkest plots could find resolution. Maybe it was time to stop reading other people's stories and start writing her own again. The days following David Martinez's arrest unfolded like a fever dream, reality bending and shifting in ways Amelia couldn't quite process. The media circus outside the bookstore intensified, then gradually dispersed as newer stories claimed the headlines. But the ripples of David's arrest spread outward through San Jose like seismic waves, cracking open old wounds and revealing truths that had been buried for years. On the third day after the arrest, Detective Morrison returned to the bookstore with a file folder thick with documents. Amelia had been cataloging new inventory when the bell chimed, and something about the detective's expression, grim determination mixed with what looked like guilt, made Amelia's hands freeze mid-motion. "We need to talk," Morrison said, gesturing to the small cafe area Sarah had set up in the corner of the store. "There's more to this than we initially realized." They sat at a small round table surrounded by cookbooks and culinary memoirs. Sarah brought coffee without being asked, then retreated to give them privacy, though Amelia could see her friend hovering near enough to intervene if needed. Morrison opened the folder, revealing crime scene photos, police reports, and pages of dense typed notes. "After we arrested David, we executed a search warrant on his apartment. What we found..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He kept trophies, jewelry, photographs, items of clothing. We're currently working to identify victims, but Amelia, there are at least 7 other women." The coffee cup slipped from Amelia's fingers, shattering against the tile floor. Neither woman moved to clean it up. 7. Amelia repeated, the word hollow. "Possibly more. Some of the items date back to 1996, before he moved to San Jose. We're working with LAPD to cross-reference with their unsolved cases." Morrison's jaw tightened. Jennifer Hartwell wasn't his first victim. She might not even have been his 10th. The bookstore tilted around Amelia. She gripped the edge of the table, forcing herself to breathe. "If you'd investigated him properly the first time..." "I know." Morrison's voice cracked. "Believe me, I know. We focused on you because of Jennifer's statement, because you were there, because it's easier to build a case against someone with no alibi than to dig deeper into the convenience store employee who vouched for you. We failed Jennifer. We failed those other women. And we failed you." Amelia wanted to scream, to throw something, to unleash 3 years of suppressed rage. Instead, she found herself asking, who were they? The other women. Morrison pulled out a series of photographs, driver's license photos, college ID pictures, images pulled from social media. Young women, most in their early 20s, all with dark hair. All bearing a superficial resemblance to Amelia herself. "This is Maria Gonzalez. Disappeared from a parking lot near San Jose State in 1998. Her body was found 3 months later in the hills above Saratoga." Morrison's finger moved to the next photo. Christina Wu, attacked outside a library in 1999, 2 months before Jennifer. She survived but suffered permanent brain damage. She's in a care facility now. Can't speak, can't walk. Each name was a hammer blow. Each face a mirror reflecting what could have been Amelia's fate. She forced herself to look at every single one, to bear witness to David Martinez's trail of destruction. "And this one," Morrison said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "This is why I'm really here." She pulled out a final photograph. The woman was younger than the others, maybe 18 or 19, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore a Lincoln High School volleyball uniform and was smiling at the camera with the unself-conscious joy of someone who believed the world was basically good. "Rachel Kowalski," Morrison said, "disappeared in March 1997. She was a senior at Lincoln High, captain of the volleyball team, planning to attend UC Berkeley on a scholarship. She left volleyball practice one evening and was never seen again. Her body was found 6 months later." The name detonated in Amelia's mind. Kowalski, Sarah's younger sister. Yes. Amelia's head whipped toward the front of the store where Sarah was reorganizing the mystery section. Her movements quick and efficient, her red hair catching the afternoon light. Sarah, who'd appeared at the bookstore 2 years ago asking for a job, who'd never mentioned a sister, who'd become Amelia's closest friend during the darkest period of her life. "Does she know?" Amelia asked. "Not yet. We only confirmed the connection this morning. Rachel's case went cold years ago. The DNA evidence from her clothing was too degraded to test at the time, but with the new technology." Morrison closed the folder. It matches David Martinez. We're certain. Amelia stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Sarah looked up, concern flickering across her face. But Amelia gestured that everything was fine. Everything was not fine. Nothing would ever be fine again. I need to tell her, Amelia said. She deserves to hear it from someone who cares about her. I can do it officially. No. Amelia's voice was firm. She's been there for me. Let me be there for her. After Morrison left, Amelia stood in the center of the bookstore, paralyzed by the weight of what she now knew. The afternoon stretched on, customers drifting in and out, the normalcy of commerce continuing around her, while her world reorganized itself into something darker and more complex. Sarah had lost her sister to David Martinez. And then, 2 years later, she'd come to work for Amelia, the woman who'd been accused of a similar crime. What had that been like for her? Had she studied Amelia, searching for signs of violence? Had she wondered if Amelia might actually be guilty? Or had she somehow known, on some instinctive level, that Amelia was innocent? As closing time approached, Amelia finally found the courage to ask Sarah to stay late. They sat in the same cafe corner where Morrison had delivered her devastating news, and Amelia took Sarah's hands in her own. There's something I need to tell you, Amelia began, and then the words poured out. The search of David's apartment, the trophies, the other victims, and finally, carefully, gently, Rachel. They found evidence that connects David to Rachel. Sarah's face went through a series of transformations. Confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally a terrible, crushing grief that seemed to age her 10 years in an instant. She made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob, and Amelia pulled her close, holding her while she shattered. I knew, Sarah whispered eventually, her voice raw. I mean, I didn't know it was him specifically, but I knew she hadn't just run away. Everyone said she must have gotten cold feet about Berkeley, that she'd just taken off, but Rachel wouldn't do that. She called me every day, every single day. And then one day, the calls stopped. I'm so sorry, Amelia said, the words inadequate but necessary. Sarah pulled back, wiping her eyes with the heel of her hand. Is that why you hired me? Because you knew about Rachel? No, I had no idea. You never mentioned. I couldn't talk about it. It hurt too much. My parents fell apart after Rachel disappeared. Dad started drinking, Mom just checked out. I was only 15 when it happened. I raised myself after that. Sarah's laugh was bitter. And then I read about you, about what happened to you, and I thought maybe you'd understand. What it's like when everyone thinks they know the truth but they're wrong. When the system fails you. Amelia felt pieces clicking into place. Sarah showing up 2 years ago, asking for a job when the bookstore could barely afford to pay one employee, let alone two. Sarah's fierce loyalty, her unwavering belief in Amelia's innocence. Sarah's tendency to work late, to lose herself in the organization of books, as if staying busy could keep the darkness at bay. You believed in me when no one else did, Amelia said. Why? Because I looked in your eyes and I saw the same thing I saw in the mirror every day. Someone who'd been broken by something that wasn't their fault. Someone who was trying to survive. Sarah stood, pacing the small space. And maybe part of me hoped that if you turned out to be innocent, if the truth came out for you, maybe there was hope for Rachel too. Maybe someone would finally care enough to solve her case. They have now, Amelia said softly. Justice is coming. For Rachel. For Jennifer. For all of them. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. But Sarah shook her head. Justice? David Martinez goes to prison, maybe gets the death penalty if California ever actually executes anyone. But what about the years he stole? Rachel would be 25 now. She'd have graduated from Berkeley, maybe gotten married, maybe had kids. My parents might have stayed together. I might have had a normal adolescence. Her voice rose, anger bleeding through the grief. Where's the justice for that? Where's the justice for you? For the 3 years of your life he took? Amelia had no answer. She'd been asking herself the same questions. The next morning brought new complications. Amelia arrived at the bookstore to find Principal Henderson from Lincoln High School waiting outside, pacing nervously in the early morning fog. He'd aged since she'd last seen him. More gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, a slight stoop to his shoulders. "Amelia," he said as she approached. "Thank you for seeing me." "I haven't agreed to see you," she replied, but she unlocked the door and let him follow her inside. They stood in the entryway, neither sitting, the conversation already adversarial. Henderson cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology. The school board, the district, we all owe you an apology. We should have stood by you. We should have fought harder for you." "Yes," Amelia said simply. "You should have. I'd like to offer you your job back. Full reinstatement, back pay for the time you missed, a public apology from the board. We could hold an assembly, let you address the students." "No," Henderson blinked. "No, I don't want my job back. I don't want your apology. I don't want an assembly." Amelia moved deeper into the store, Henderson trailing behind her. "You took the easy way out. You sacrificed me to appease angry parents and protect the district's reputation. You never once asked me what happened. You never once considered that I might be telling the truth. We had to think of the students' safety." "I was thinking of the students' safety." The words exploded out of her. "I've spent my entire adult life thinking about students. I became a teacher because I wanted to help young people find themselves through literature. I stayed late, came in early, spent my own money on books for students who couldn't afford them. And you threw me away the moment it became inconvenient to defend me." Henderson's face reddened. "We were in an impossible position." "No, you were in an uncomfortable position. I was in an impossible position. You had a choice and you chose wrong." Amelia crossed her arms. "I'm not coming back to Lincoln. I'm not even sure I want to teach anymore. You took that from me. You can't give it back with an assembly and a check." After Henderson left, Amelia found herself shaking with adrenaline. Sarah, who'd heard the entire exchange from the back office, appeared with tea. "You okay?" Sarah asked. "I don't know. I thought I'd feel better, standing up to him, but I just feel empty." The phone rang. Sarah answered, her expression growing troubled. "It's for you. Someone from Channel 7 News. They want to interview you for a special report on wrongful accusations. Tell them no." But the calls kept coming. Channel 7, Channel 4, the San Jose Mercury News, the San Francisco Chronicle, even a producer from a national morning show. Everyone wanted to hear Amelia's story, to mine her trauma for ratings and clicks. She refused them all. What she couldn't refuse was the parade of people who started showing up at the bookstore over the following days. Former colleagues from Lincoln High, some apologetic, others defensive. Neighbors who'd crossed the street to avoid her now wanted to chat as if nothing had happened. Students she'd taught, now graduated and working, coming to say they'd never doubted her. On the fourth day, Tyler walked in, the student who'd struggled with dyslexia, now 21 and working as a graphic designer. He'd heard about the arrest and had driven up from Los Angeles to see her. "Ms. King," he said, and his eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry. I should have said something back then. I should have told them you couldn't have done it. You changed my life. You saw me when everyone else just saw a kid who couldn't read right." Amelia hugged him, this former student who was now taller than her, who'd found success despite a world that had labeled him learning disabled. "You don't have anything to apologize for. You were just a kid. But I could have helped. I could have written a letter or testified or something." "Tyler, look at me." She waited until he met her eyes. "The system failed. Adults failed. You were 17 years old. This wasn't your responsibility." But as he left, Amelia wondered if she really believed that. How much responsibility did ordinary people have to stand up for each other? How much courage did it take to defend someone when the tide of public opinion had turned against them? And how many people had stayed silent not because they believed she was guilty, but simply because speaking up was too difficult, too risky, too uncomfortable? Maria, another former student, came the next day. She'd gone on to study at San Jose State, was now a teacher herself at a middle school in East San Jose. "I teach my students about injustice," she told Amelia. About the Central Park Five, about Stephen Avery, about all the people who've been wrongly convicted. And now I tell them about you. About how easy it is to destroy someone's life with rumors and assumptions. I'm not sure I want to be a cautionary tale, Amelia said wryly. You're not a cautionary tale. You're proof that the truth matters, even when it takes too long to come out. But the truth had taken so long. 3 years. 1,095 days. And in that time, David Martinez had continued working, living, walking the streets freely while Amelia had been imprisoned by suspicion. Detective Morrison stopped by again, this time with news about David's arraignment. He's being charged with 7 counts of murder, 3 counts of attempted murder, and various assault charges. The DA is pushing for the death penalty. Will I have to testify? Amelia asked. Probably. Not about the attacks, you didn't witness those. But about that night, about finding Jennifer, about your interactions with David at the 7-Eleven. Your testimony will help establish his pattern of behavior, his ability to manipulate and deceive. The thought of facing David in a courtroom made Amelia's stomach churn. But she nodded. Whatever it takes. Marcus stopped by that evening after his shift, still in uniform, looking exhausted. He'd been working overtime, helping process the evidence from David's apartment, tracking down families of the other victims. Christina Wu's family wants to meet you, he said. The woman who was attacked 2 months before Jennifer, who survived but has brain damage. Her parents read about your case, about how you were accused, and they want to thank you. Thank me? For what? For trying to save Jennifer. For being willing to run toward danger instead of away from it. Christina's father said that even though she can't speak anymore, can't really communicate, he still talks to her about current events. He's going to tell her that the man who hurt her has been caught. He thinks maybe, on some level, she'll understand. And he wants her to know that there are people like you in the world. People who help. Amelia felt tears threatening. I didn't help enough. Jennifer still died. You did everything you could. Jennifer's parents know that too. They've released a statement saying they're sorry for what happened to you, that they never wanted you to be suspected. But sorry didn't undo the damage. Sorry didn't restore her reputation or her career or the 3 years of her life. Sorry was just a word people said when they didn't know what else to offer. The following week brought the preliminary hearing. Amelia sat in the courtroom gallery, sandwiched between Sarah and Marcus, watching as David Martinez was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles. He looked smaller than she remembered, diminished somehow, as if arrest had shrunk him. The prosecutor, a sharp-faced woman named Rebecca Torres, laid out the evidence methodically. The DNA matches. The trophies found in David's apartment. Testimony from a forensic psychologist about the profile of serial offenders who kept souvenirs. Security camera footage from various locations showing David following women, watching them, stalking them. And then the defense attorney stood up. James Chun, ironic that he shared a surname with Marcus, was a public defender who looked barely older than the students Amelia used to teach. He argued that the DNA evidence was circumstantial, that the trophies could have innocent explanations, that his client had no prior convictions and deserved the presumption of innocence. Amelia felt rage building in her chest. Presumption of innocence. She'd been denied that same presumption. Jennifer Hartwell's dying words had been enough to destroy Amelia's life, but mountains of physical evidence somehow weren't enough to guarantee David's conviction. During a recess, Amelia stepped outside for air and found herself face to face with Jennifer Hartwell's mother, Catherine. The older woman looked fragile, worn down by grief, but her eyes were clear and determined. Miss King, she said, I've wanted to speak to you for so long. Amelia braced herself, unsure what to expect. I'm sorry, Catherine continued. I'm so sorry. I never thought you were guilty. Even when the police said Jennifer identified you, I didn't believe it. Jennifer was confused, traumatized. I tried to tell them that, but no one would listen. You tried. Amelia's voice cracked. I called the police department every week for months. I told them Jennifer loved her teachers, that she'd never hurt anyone, that if she saw you in that alley, it was because you were helping, not because you'd attacked her. But they said I was in denial, that I couldn't accept my daughter's word. Catherine's hands twisted together. I should have done more. I should have gone to the newspapers, hired a lawyer, made them listen. Amelia reached out and took the older woman's hands. You were grieving. You just lost your daughter. That wasn't your fight to take on. But you lost years of your life because no one listened. They stood together in the courthouse hallway, two women bound by David Martinez's violence, and cried for everything they'd both lost. Back in the courtroom, the judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. David Martinez was remanded without bail. As he was led away, he turned and looked directly at Amelia. His expression was unreadable, not guilty, not defiant, just blank, empty, as if none of this mattered to him at all. That night, Amelia couldn't sleep. She kept seeing David's face, kept remembering his friendly smiles at the 7-Eleven, kept wondering how many other women he'd smiled at before he hurt them. She got up and went downstairs to the bookstore, turning on only a single lamp, and found herself drawn once again to the Steinbeck first edition. She opened the book and began to read. East of Eden was a story about good and evil, about brothers and fathers and sons, about the capacity for both virtue and violence that existed in every human heart. But it was also about the possibility of redemption, about the Hebrew word timshel. Thou mayest, the idea that people could choose their own paths, could overcome their worst impulses. David Martinez had chosen violence. Again and again he'd chosen it. And Amelia had nearly been destroyed in the aftermath. But she'd also chosen. She'd chosen to run toward Jennifer's scream instead of away from it. She'd chosen to stay in San Jose even when everything in her wanted to flee. She'd chosen to keep the bookstore running, to honor her father's memory, to survive. And now she had to choose what came next. The trial of David Martinez began on a cold morning in late January, nearly 4 months after his arrest. The courthouse was packed. Victims' families, reporters, curious onlookers drawn by the sensational nature of the case. Amelia sat in the second row behind the prosecution, flanked by Sarah and Marcus, steeling herself for what was to come. The jury had been selected over 2 weeks of painstaking questioning. 7 women, 5 men, ranging in age from 23 to 68. Amelia studied their faces, wondering what they thought when they looked at David, whether they could see the monster beneath the ordinary exterior. Prosecutor Rebecca Torres stood to deliver her opening statement. She was in her early 40s, Amelia had learned, with a reputation for being ruthless but fair. She'd taken a personal interest in the case, had met with each victim's family, had spent hours going over evidence with Morrison and her team. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Torres began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. Over the next several weeks, you're going to hear about a man who lived a double life. By day, David Martinez was a convenience store clerk, a community college student, a neighbor who smiled and made small talk. By night, he was a predator who stalked, attacked, and murdered young women. She outlined the evidence methodically, the DNA matches, the trophies, the pattern of attacks spanning nearly a decade. She described each victim: Rachel Kowalski, the volleyball player with dreams of Berkeley; Maria Gonzalez, the business major who'd survived domestic violence only to be killed by a stranger; Christina Wu, the library volunteer who now couldn't feed herself; Jennifer Hartwell, the graduate student who died believing her rescuer was her attacker. And then Torres did something unexpected. She turned and looked directly at Amelia. This case is also about what happens when the system fails. When law enforcement, under pressure to solve a heinous crime, focuses on the wrong person. Amelia King tried to save Jennifer Hartwell's life. She called 911, stayed with Jennifer, held her hand while they waited for help. And for that act of compassion, she was subjected to months of investigation, public suspicion, and character assassination. She lost her career. She lost her reputation. She nearly lost herself. Amelia felt tears threatening but forced them back. She wouldn't cry here, not in front of David, not in front of the cameras. The defense will try to create doubt, Torres continued. They'll argue that DNA evidence can be contaminated, that witnesses can be mistaken, that a jury should err on the side of caution. And normally, that's right. We should be cautious. We should demand proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But in our caution 3 years ago, we destroyed an innocent woman's life while a serial killer continued to walk free. Let's not make that mistake again. Let's get justice for these victims. Let's get justice for Amelia King. The defense attorney, James Chun, stood for his opening statement. He was nervous. Amelia could see it in the way his hands shook slightly as he gripped his notes. David Martinez's case was a nightmare for a public defender. Overwhelming evidence, multiple victims, a defendant who'd kept trophies of his crimes. But Chun did his job. He argued that the DNA evidence had been improperly stored, that the chain of custody was questionable, that his client's apartment had been searched without proper authorization. He suggested that David might have found the items in question, that collecting things didn't make someone a killer, that the prosecution was building a circumstantial case designed to appeal to emotion rather than logic. David Martinez is not a monster, Chin said, though his voice lacked conviction. He's a man who's been accused of terrible crimes based on evidence that, when you examine it closely, is far less conclusive than the prosecution wants you to believe. He deserves a fair trial. He deserves the presumption of innocence that our justice system guarantees. Amelia watched David throughout the opening statements. He sat perfectly still, his face blank, occasionally whispering to his attorney but showing no emotion. How did someone become so empty? What had happened in his life to turn him into someone capable of such violence? The first week of trial brought a parade of forensic experts. DNA specialists explained how genetic material was collected, analyzed, and matched. Crime scene investigators detailed the evidence found at each attack location. Medical examiners testified about the injuries inflicted on victims, using clinical language to describe unspeakable brutality. Christina Wu's parents testified, describing their daughter before and after the attack. Christina had been studying to be a teacher, they said. She'd volunteered at the library every Saturday, had sung in the church choir, had been planning her wedding when David Martinez had beaten her so badly that she'd never speak again. She was walking to her car after her shift at the library, Christina's father said, his English heavily accented but clear. It was only 8 o'clock, still light out. She did everything right. Parked under a streetlight, had her keys ready, called me on her cell phone so I could hear she was safe. But he was waiting. He hit her from behind. By the time someone found her, it was too late. The damage was done. The defense cross-examined gently, knowing that attacking grieving parents would alienate the jury. But Chun planted seeds of doubt. How did they know David had been waiting specifically for Christina? Could it have been a random attack, a crime of opportunity? Could someone else have been responsible? Maria Gonzalez's mother testified next, describing the months of searching after Maria disappeared. The false hope every time the phone rang. The crushing despair when hikers found her daughter's body in the hills above Saratoga. The police said it was my fault, Mrs. Gonzalez said through tears. They said Maria must have gone up there with someone, must have known her killer. They questioned her boyfriend, her ex-husband, everyone she'd ever dated. But they never looked at strangers. They never considered that someone might have taken her there. Rachel Kowalski's parents couldn't bring themselves to testify. Sarah's father, Robert Kowalski, sat in the gallery every day, a silent, broken presence, but when called to the stand, he simply shook his head. Sarah's mother hadn't come at all. She'd moved to Oregon years ago, unable to bear living in the city where her daughter had vanished. Instead, Sarah testified. Amelia watched her friend take the stand, saw her hands trembling as she placed them on the Bible to be sworn in. Sarah described her sister, bright, athletic, kind, the sort of person who befriended lonely kids at school, who volunteered to clean up the beach on weekends, who'd been excited about college not because of the prestige but because she wanted to learn how to make the world better. Rachel called me every day, Sarah said. Even when she was busy with volleyball and college applications, she'd call me before bed. We'd talk about nothing, TV shows, boys, stupid stuff. And then one day she didn't call. I waited by the phone all night. I thought maybe she'd just forgotten, that she'd call the next morning and apologize. But she never called again. Torres asked, What do you want this jury to know about your sister? Sarah's voice strengthened. I want them to know that she mattered. That she wasn't just a victim, not just a statistic. She was my sister. She taught me how to braid my hair, how to stand up to bullies, how to be brave. She had a future. And David Martinez took it from her. He took it from all of us. The defense tried to shake Sarah's testimony, suggesting that Rachel might have run away, that teenage girls sometimes disappeared voluntarily. Sarah's response was fierce. My sister didn't run away. She was murdered. And for 10 years, no one cared enough to find out who killed her. Don't you dare suggest she chose this. When Detective Morrison took the stand, Torres walked her through the original investigation into Jennifer Hartwell's attack. Morrison didn't flinch from her mistakes. She explained how Jennifer's dying identification of a woman with dark hair in a green jacket had led them to focus on Amelia King. Miss King matched the description, Morrison said, her voice steady but strained. She was at the scene. She'd been at the 7-Eleven minutes before the attack. And we were under tremendous pressure to make an arrest. A young woman had been murdered in what should have been a safe neighborhood. The community was terrified. The media was demanding answers. So you focused on the easiest suspect, Torres said. We focused on the wrong suspect. We didn't dig deep enough into David Martinez's background. He changed his name, which should have been a red flag, but we accepted his explanation that it was due to family estrangement. We didn't push hard enough. And because of that failure, Amelia King's life was destroyed, and David Martinez continued to hurt people for 3 more years. The defense tried to use Morrison's admission against her, suggesting that if the police had made mistakes before, they might be making mistakes now, rushing to judgment again. But Morrison held firm. The difference, she said, is that this time we have physical evidence, DNA that conclusively links David Martinez to multiple victims. Trophies from those victims found in his possession. Security footage showing him following women. This isn't about pressure or assumptions. This is about science and facts. As the second week began, Torres called Amelia to the stand. The moment felt surreal. Walking through the courtroom, placing her hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth. She sat in the witness box, acutely aware of David Martinez less than 20 feet away, and forced herself to look at the jury instead of at him. Torres began gently, establishing Amelia's background, her work as a teacher, her family's bookstore, her reputation in the community before the attack. Then she moved to the night of March 15, 1999. Tell us what happened after you left the 7-Eleven, Torres said. Amelia took a breath and began. She described walking to her car, hearing the scream, running toward it despite her fear. She described finding Jennifer in the alley, the girl's face swollen and bloody, her breathing labored. What did you do? I called 911. I took off my jacket and put it under her head. I held her hand. I told her help was coming, that she was going to be okay, even though I wasn't sure that was true. Did Jennifer say anything to you? She tried to speak, but I couldn't understand. She was in too much pain. I just kept telling her to hold on, to stay with me. Torres paused, letting the jury absorb this. And after the attack, you cooperated fully with the investigation? Yes. I answered every question. I gave DNA samples, fingerprints, whatever they needed. I had nothing to hide. Yet you were treated as a suspect. Yes. How did that affect your life? Amelia's voice cracked slightly. I lost my job. I lost my reputation. Friends stopped calling. I got hate mail, death threats. Someone vandalized my family's store. My father. She paused, composing herself. My father died of a heart attack 6 months ago. The stress of supporting me through the investigation, of keeping the store running when customers stopped coming, it killed him. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing. And during all this time, Torres continued, David Martinez was free. Yes, he continued working at convenience stores. He continued to interact with customers, to walk the streets, to live his life. While mine fell apart. The defense cross-examination was brief. Chun knew better than to attack Amelia too aggressively. She was sympathetic, and the jury clearly felt for her. But he did try to create doubt about her memories of that night. "Miss King, you said Jennifer Hartwell tried to speak to you. Is it possible she was trying to identify her attacker?" "I don't know. She was barely conscious." "Is it possible that in her confusion, she mistook you for someone else?" "Jennifer was dying. She was traumatized and in pain. I don't think we can know what she was thinking. But she did identify a woman who looked like you." Amelia met his eyes steadily. "She identified a woman with dark hair in a green jacket. There are thousands of women in San Jose who fit that description. The difference is that the actual attacker, David Martinez, convinced the police to focus on me instead of on him." Chun tried again. "Isn't it true that you can't be absolutely certain what Jennifer was trying to tell the paramedics?" "What I'm certain of," Amelia said, her voice ringing clear, "is that I tried to save her life, and I'm certain that David Martinez took it." The third week brought testimony from David's former co-workers, neighbors, and acquaintances. They painted a picture of a quiet, unassuming man who kept to himself, who was polite but distant, who never caused problems but also never formed real connections. One co-worker from the 7-Eleven where David had worked in 1999 testified about his behavior. "He always volunteered to work late shifts. He said he preferred them because they were quieter. And he'd watch the women who came in, not obviously, but I noticed. He'd track them with his eyes, watch where they parked, when they left." "Did you report this?" Torres asked. "No. I thought he was just lonely, maybe socially awkward. I didn't realize." The co-worker's voice broke. "If I'd known, if I'd said something." A forensic psychologist testified about the profile of serial offenders who kept trophies. Dr. Patricia Yamamoto explained that these individuals often took souvenirs to relive their crimes, to maintain a sense of power over their victims even after the attacks. The items found in Mr. Martinez's apartment, jewelry, photographs, pieces of clothing, are consistent with this pattern, Dr. Yamamoto said. "These aren't random objects. They're specifically chosen to remind him of his victims, to allow him to revisit those moments of violence and control." The defense tried to suggest that David might have simply found these items, that collecting things didn't prove he'd hurt anyone. But Dr. Yamamoto was unshakable. The items matched those reported missing by the victims or their families. The probability that Mr. Martinez innocently acquired jewelry from 7 different murdered or attacked women, all of whom bore a physical resemblance to each other, is functionally zero. As the prosecution's case drew to a close, Torres called one final witness, Marcus Chun. He testified about his friendship with Amelia, about how he'd watched her suffer through the investigation, about his frustration at not being able to help because he was just a rookie cop with no authority. "I knew she was innocent," Marcus said. "I've known Amelia since we were kids. She's incapable of that kind of violence. But knowing something and being able to prove it are different things." Torres asked, "When the new DNA evidence came back, when you realized you'd found the actual perpetrator, what did you feel?" Marcus looked directly at David Martinez. "Relief that Amelia would finally be vindicated, and rage that we'd let this man walk free for so long, that our mistakes had cost years of her life and possibly other victims their lives too." The defense presented their case over just 3 days. They called character witnesses who testified that David had seemed like a normal guy, that they'd never seen any signs of violence. They brought in their own DNA expert who quibbled over collection protocols. They suggested that the trophies could have innocent explanations, that perhaps David had worked at a thrift store or found items left behind at various locations. It was a weak defense, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. The defense had no good options. The evidence was overwhelming, and David himself had refused to testify, which meant the jury never heard his side of the story. Closing arguments came on a Wednesday afternoon. Torres stood before the jury and methodically reviewed every piece of evidence. The DNA matches, the trophies, the pattern of attacks, the testimonies from victims' families. She reminded them of Amelia's ordeal, of the system's failure, of the importance of getting this right. "David Martinez is a predator," she concluded. "He hunted young women. He attacked them. He murdered some and left others permanently damaged. He kept souvenirs of his crimes like a hunter keeps trophies. And when suspicion began to point toward him, He manipulated the investigation to focus on an innocent woman. He is guilty beyond any reasonable doubt. Find him guilty on all counts. Chen's closing argument was brief. He reminded the jury of the presumption of innocence, of the prosecution's burden of proof, of the importance of certainty beyond a reasonable doubt. But his heart wasn't in it, and the jury could tell. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman, a black woman in her 50s who worked as a librarian, stood to read the verdict. On the count of murder in the first degree in the death of Jennifer Hartwell, we find the defendant guilty. A collective exhale rippled through the courtroom. Jennifer's mother, Catherine, began to sob quietly. On the count of murder in the first degree in the death of Rachel Kowalski, we find the defendant guilty. Sarah gripped Amelia's hand so tightly it hurt. Robert Kowalski, Sarah's father, bowed his head and wept. The forewoman continued through all the charges: 7 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of attempted murder, multiple assault charges. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Each word was a hammer blow of justice, long delayed but finally delivered. David Martinez showed no reaction. He sat perfectly still, his face blank, as if the verdict had nothing to do with him. Even when the judge ordered him remanded pending sentencing, even when the bailiffs approached to lead him away, he remained eerily calm. As he was led past Amelia's row, he stopped. The bailiffs tried to move him along, but he turned and looked directly at her. For the first time since his arrest, emotion flickered across his face. Not remorse, not anger, but something like curiosity. "I remember you," he said quietly. "From the store. You always bought red wine and talked about books." Amelia felt her blood run cold. He remembered her. Had she been on his list? If she hadn't happened upon Jennifer in that alley, would she have been his next victim? "You should have minded your own business," David continued, his voice flat. "If you'd just gone home that night, none of this would have happened to you. None of this." Amelia stood, her voice shaking with rage. "You murdered 7 women. You destroyed families. You took away futures and dreams and possibilities. And you're blaming me for trying to save someone's life." David's expression shifted, something that might have been a smile flickering at the corners of his mouth. "I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying actions have consequences. You ran toward the scream, and look what it cost you." "I'd do it again," Amelia said fiercely. "I'd run toward that scream every single time, because that's what decent people do. We help. We don't hurt. And if you can't understand that, then you're not just guilty, you're broken in a way that can never be fixed." The bailiffs pulled David away, but his words echoed in Amelia's mind. Actions have consequences. He was right in his twisted way. Her decision to help Jennifer had cost her 3 years of hell. But it had also revealed who she truly was. Not a person who could turn away from suffering. Not someone who valued her own comfort over someone else's life. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. This time, Amelia didn't run. She stood on the steps with Sarah and Marcus beside her, and she faced the cameras. "Justice was served today," she said. "But justice delayed is justice diminished. 7 women are dead. 3 more carry permanent scars. And I lost 3 years of my life to a system that was too quick to judge and too slow to investigate properly. We need to do better. We need to demand better." A reporter shouted, "Will you be suing the police department?" "I don't know. Right now, I just want to acknowledge the victims, Rachel, Maria, Christina, Jennifer, and all the others. They deserved better. Their families deserved better. And I hope that David Martinez's conviction brings them some measure of peace." Later that evening, back at the bookstore, Amelia sat with Sarah, Marcus, and Detective Morrison. The detective had brought champagne, though the mood felt more somber than celebratory. "I owe you more than an apology," Morrison said to Amelia. "I owe you my career. I should resign." "Don't," Amelia said. "Don't give him that victory. You made mistakes, yes, but you also made them right. You reopened the case. You pushed for new testing. You caught him. That matters." Morrison's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I'll never forgive myself for what we put you through." Then channel that into something productive. Train new detectives better. Push for reforms. Make sure this doesn't happen to someone else. They drank the champagne in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Sarah spoke. What now? What do we do now that it's over? It's not over, Amelia said. Sentencing is still to come. And even after that, the healing, that's going to take time. But you're free, Marcus said. You can teach again. You can do anything you want. Could she? Amelia looked around the bookstore, at the shelves her grandfather had built, at the rare bookcase holding the Steinbeck first edition, at the cafe corner where she'd told Sarah about Rachel, at the window where she'd stood countless mornings watching the world go by. This place had been her prison and her sanctuary, her burden and her salvation. I don't know what I want anymore, she admitted. I don't know who I am without this hanging over me. Sarah leaned her head on Amelia's shoulder. Then we figure it out together, one day at a time. The sentencing hearing came 6 weeks later, on a morning that felt more like spring than late winter. The cherry blossoms along the courthouse steps had begun to bloom, their delicate pink petals a stark contrast to the gravity of the proceedings inside. The courtroom was once again packed, but this time the energy felt different. Less anticipation, more finality. David Martinez had been convicted. Now the question was simply, how would he pay? The prosecution was seeking the death penalty. California hadn't executed anyone in years due to legal challenges and a governor-imposed moratorium. But the symbolism mattered. Death penalty cases received more resources, more appeals, more scrutiny. And Torres wanted to send a message. Serial killers would face the maximum consequences the law allowed. The hearing began with victim impact statements. One by one, family members took the stand to describe what David Martinez had stolen from them. Maria Gonzalez's mother spoke in Spanish, her words translated for the court, describing how she'd aged 20 years in the months after Maria's disappearance, how she still set a place for her daughter at Sunday dinner out of habit and hope. Christina Wu's father brought a video of Christina before the attack, laughing at her engagement party, dancing with her fiancé, radiant with joy. Then he described visiting her in the care facility where she now lived, feeding her through a tube, wiping drool from her chin, knowing that the vibrant woman in the video was gone forever. He didn't just attack my daughter, Mr. Wu said, his voice breaking. He killed who she was. And then he let her body keep living, trapped and helpless. Sometimes I think death would have been kinder. Robert Kowalski took the stand on behalf of Rachel. He was thinner than he'd been at the trial, grayer, as if the verdict had released something in him that he'd been holding tightly for 10 years. He pulled out a photograph. Rachel in her volleyball uniform, 16 years old, grinning at the camera with the unself-conscious confidence of someone who believed the world was fundamentally good. My daughter was going to change the world, he said. She wanted to be a teacher, like Miss King was. She wanted to help kids who came from difficult backgrounds, who needed someone to believe in them. She had this capacity for love that I've never seen in anyone else. She made everyone around her better. He paused, collecting himself. After she disappeared, my marriage fell apart. My wife couldn't stay in San Jose, couldn't bear to see Rachel's friends graduate and go to college and get married when our daughter would never do those things. My other daughter, Sarah, had to grow up too fast, had to take care of herself because I was too broken to take care of anyone. Rachel's death, it destroyed our whole family. And for 10 years, we didn't even know who to blame. We just lived with this wound that never healed. He looked at David Martinez, who sat impassive at the defense table. I don't believe in the death penalty. I never have. But I also don't believe you should ever be free. You took my daughter's future. You should lose yours. The narrative opens with victim impact statements at David Martinez's sentencing hearing. Catherine Hartwell, mother of Jennifer Hartwell, Martinez's first murder victim, delivers a powerful testimony. She explains how her daughter's dying words were misinterpreted. Jennifer had told paramedics she saw a woman with dark hair in a green jacket, referring to Amelia King, who had tried to save her life. Instead, police twisted these words to cast Amelia as a suspect, giving Martinez 3 more years to kill and assault other women while the investigation focused on an innocent person. Catherine requests that the court formally exonerate Amelia. David Martinez delivers a chilling statement before sentencing, refusing to apologize and expressing no remorse. He explains that he enjoyed making kind women feel powerless and afraid, and explicitly states he would kill again if given the opportunity. Judge Patricia Mendoza sentences him to 7 consecutive life terms plus 50 years, ensuring he will die in prison. She also grants Catherine's request, formally exonerating Amelia and ordering the San Jose Police Department to issue a public apology. In the weeks following the trial, the media attention finally subsides. The police department holds a press conference acknowledging their failures and announcing reforms. Amelia files a civil lawsuit against the city, which settles for $2 million. Money she views as compensation for 3 years of suffering that destroyed her career, reputation, and contributed to her father's death. With the settlement, Amelia creates the Jennifer Hartwell and Rachel Kowalski Foundation, named for 2 of Martinez's victims. The foundation provides legal support, counseling, and financial assistance to people wrongfully accused and to families of violent crime victims. She renovates her bookstore, adding a community room for support groups and expanding her inventory to include books about justice, wrongful convictions, and survivor narratives. Marcus Chun, the detective who helped solve the case, gets promoted and begins working cold cases, using new forensic technologies to solve decades-old murders. Sarah Kowalski, whose sister Rachel was murdered by Martinez, enrolls in criminal justice studies to become a victim advocate. She also reconciles with her estranged mother, slowly rebuilding their relationship after years of separation following Rachel's death. 6 months after the sentencing, Amelia's former principal asks her to speak to the faculty at Lincoln High School about wrongful accusations. She addresses the teachers who had abandoned her, explaining the difference between doubt and judgment, between questioning and condemnation. The speech marks an important step in her healing, though she focuses on education rather than blame. A year after the trial, the foundation holds its first major fundraiser, attended by over 300 people including victims' families and former students. Christina Wu's parents bring their severely brain-damaged daughter. Catherine Hartwell speaks about Jennifer's legacy, and Amelia's former students present a check for $15,000 they raised independently. The event marks a turning point, proof that Amelia's suffering has been transformed into meaningful change. 3 years after the conviction, the bookstore has become a community hub. Amelia, now 34, looks and feels different, softer, more hopeful. The foundation unveils a memorial in a downtown park featuring a bronze tree with plaques bearing victims' names. Over 100 people attend, including families of victims, wrongfully accused individuals. The foundation has helped, and law enforcement officers committed to reform. Speakers reflect on how justice extends beyond courtroom verdicts to include systemic reform, survivor support, and remembrance. The memorial represents both loss and growth, acknowledging that tragedy breaks people, but can also help them find new strength. Marcus continues solving cold cases. Sarah directs a statewide victim advocacy program. Detective Morrison teaches other investigators how to avoid the mistakes that nearly destroyed Amelia's life. 5 years after the conviction, 10 years after the original crime, Amelia celebrates the bookstore's 25th anniversary. Now 39, she has resumed teaching through community education programs. The foundation has expanded to 3 California cities, helping over 500 people annually. Her life has taken on new dimensions. Marcus's daughter is named after her. Sarah is engaged. Former students have become educators and social workers inspired by her example. Christina Wu dies peacefully after years of minimal brain function, and her father establishes a psychology scholarship in her name. Sarah's parents remarry after years apart. Jennifer Hartwell's college roommate opens a clinic for abuse survivors, Jennifer's original dream, with foundation seed funding. 11 years after the conviction, Amelia publishes a memoir titled Presumed Guilty, a memoir of wrongful accusation and redemption. The book becomes an unexpected bestseller, used in college courses on criminal justice and sociology. She becomes a sought-after speaker at conferences, addressing structural problems that enable wrongful accusations while highlighting positive reforms she has witnessed. At 44, She keynotes a Stanford criminal justice reform conference, emphasizing that her story isn't unique. Systemic failures regularly destroy innocent lives, particularly those with fewer resources and less privilege. A law student whose brother was wrongly convicted approaches her after the speech, exemplifying the countless families the foundation continues to help. On her 50th birthday, Amelia visits her father's grave, reflecting on how far she has come since his death 23 years earlier. The bookstore opens a second location. The foundation has helped over 2,000 people. She receives a journal from Sarah, encouraging her to write her private truths, not the public memoir, but her authentic inner experience. Amelia begins documenting her ongoing healing, acknowledging that recovery doesn't mean forgetting but learning to live with trauma without being defined by it. 15 years after the conviction, filmmaker Linda Tran, Christina Wu's younger sister, creates an award-winning documentary that sparks national conversations and leads to congressional hearings on wrongful accusations. At 55, Amelia focuses primarily on advocacy work while her assistant manager runs the bookstore. The foundation employs 32 people across 6 states, having helped exonerate 47 people and supported thousands of families. On the 20th anniversary of Martinez's conviction, now 55, Amelia speaks at a remembrance ceremony. Many original participants have died, but their children and grandchildren carry the work forward. She addresses young people who weren't alive during the original crimes, challenging them to choose between accepting injustice and demanding better, to be the defense attorneys, prosecutors, journalists, and citizens who prioritize truth and compassion. The narrative concludes with Amelia reflecting in her journal about transformation. "I've turned tragedy into legacy. I've built something that will outlast me." She has moved from victim to survivor to advocate, creating a lasting impact that extends far beyond her personal suffering. Her story embodies the possibility of transforming trauma into service, finding purpose in pain, and building justice one case at a time. After 25 years, she has not just survived. She has created meaningful change that will continue long after her lifetime. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.